What's up, everybody? Ben Razzie here for Odd Chopper, talking all things national championship game in college football over at No House Advantage. We've got TCU, we've got Georgia, and we've got props to break down. We're going to build out our card over on NHA. Also going to tell you a way. Get $100 right in that account when you sign up over there. I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's dive in to what we've got going on and talk about this game. So, we know what's going on. It's Georgia and TCU, the defending national champs, Georgia Bulldogs. They got past Ohio State in a true classic back-and-forth game, came down to the wire, missed field goal late for Ohio State. Georgia survives and advances. TCU knocks off Michigan. Crazy scoring game that picks sixes and fumbles and everything in between. We know what we're getting. We've got Heisman-level players all over the field, a defense in Georgia that's incredibly difficult to go against. So where are we going for the picks? The first one up, maybe not the most well-known player out there, but Tay Barber operating in that slot, I think is really primed to have a good game here, over 35.5 receiving yards. Part of this is the man right below him in Davis didn't have a great game against Michigan, and Tay Barber actually worked ahead of him if you look at routes run, you look at targets, things of that nature, and certainly that could play a factor here. So there should be big opportunities for Tay Barber in this passing game to make plays. Now, we know Quentin Johnston on the outside is a true alpha, and we know that he's going to get ample opportunities. But I was talking with Matt Kajeski, who is as sharp of a college football mind as we have on this channel, and he told me Quentin Johnston only had 2 double-digit target games the entire year, and it just shows that TCU is the type of team. They really can spread it around. There's not going to be a massive target share. And let's be real. I'm not saying that they can't win the game, but they are significant underdogs, 12.5-point underdogs here. Tay Barber and all these pass catchers should be busy, even against Georgia's secondary, operating out of the slot. They're going to have a lot of opportunities for Tay Barber. I'm going to get the card started with over 35.5 receiving yards in this spot. Now, if you haven't seen this site before, you're saying, okay, this looks pretty cool. What is No House Advantage? This is what we're doing. You've got all these different props, and we're projecting over, under, and we're building out a card. And you get a multiplier for how many you want to do. If you put 3, you get 5x, 4, more, 5. You can get up 21x on this. You can play versus the house. You can play versus other people, all the different sports. You see it along the top, soccer, college basketball, NHL, all these things. And if you want to get started, why not get the money? Use the link in the description of this video. It takes 2 minutes to sign up. You sign up, use that promo code Stokastic, a first deposit bonus of up to $100. So you're going to get some money to play with every time you join a new site.
Deeper dive. So week 18, a little bit different of a fantasy slate than we typically see over the course of the NFL season. And also, since there's a Saturday 2-game slate, instead of Neil and I's normal tournament strategy show, doing a deep dive for the slate that we have on Saturday. The 2-game are going to be followed by live before lock. So as you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Any questions you guys have, throw them into the YouTube chat. Just a 2-game slate. I think we'll be able to hit on a lot of the different questions that you guys have. And also, shout out to No House Advantage, the sponsor of today's show. Neil, week 18 of the NFL season. How you feeling about the final week of the regular season?
I mean, it's a big letdown to have all of like the season-long stuff, and I'll say it. Everybody, I'm going to get shit for it. I'm going to say the words right in the first minute here. Best ball is over. People have been giving me shit for talking too much about best ball. Best ball is over now. We no longer have that. So we are just doing DFS now, but we have some nice showdown games going. We've got the 2-game main slate. We've got a bigger main slate tomorrow. So still plenty of excitement going on. We are the live before lock, right? This show is live before lock. Or did I misread that? I think we're the only show.
Oh, so my bad. I was thinking of it as just a deep dive because we're going game by game. But yeah, that aside, we're breaking down the 2 games here and just going to be going game by game because I think that's just the easiest way to break down a 2-game slate as opposed to just kind of being like, hey, here are all the guys. Because I do feel like if we go position by position, it'll be You kind of get pigeonholed into being like everybody's in play because everybody kind of is in play.
Everybody is
for a 2-game slate. But I want to make sure that we really break down each team, kind of go through the different situations, and what are we going to be looking at in terms of potentially rostering some backup running backs or players that we think could be leverage plays in large field tournaments. But week 18, how does your mindset change for this as compared to a lot of other slates we see over the course of the regular season? Because obviously, this is a lot different just in terms of how news impacts these slates and just the difference in terms of importance of the games.
Yeah, I mean, you named it. So for both this slate and tomorrow's slate, it's so much more news based than a typical slate is. I mean, you obviously we always have alerts on, every week we're going to be checking the news, but this week it's especially important. And like the little things that coaches say are suddenly more meaningful when coaches are talking about, like, I mean, sometimes coaches will straight up say this player's not going to play the full game, or we're going to treat this like any other week. We're trying to win this game. Those little nuggets are a little bit more impactful this week. For example, we got the news yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, it came out, Zamir White might have a bigger role this week. He might be playing a big role this week. And then, of course, the same beat writer comes out today and says, Josh Jacobs' father is in the hospital. His father wants him to play. Josh Jacobs is playing for his father. So maybe that one's not as helpful because we're getting kind of conflicting reports there. But in general, we're getting more of those kinds of nuggets that are meaningful because it's not a regular week where we know everybody's going to play and they're going to be playing all out trying to win. This week, we don't really know all of the motivation. So much more, news based this week. And then, of course, this slate being a 2-game slate, we also have to factor in, I treated 2-game slate. So even, aside from the week 18 stuff, it's different playing a 2-game slate from a full slate.
Yeah. And so that's also something just inherently that becomes different about this is that 2-game slate, not as many options. And I think this is where we could also kind of get creative in terms of some of the ownership and what we're going to do in large field tournaments. So let's start with that, with the Kansas City Chiefs. Going to be talking about them taking on the Raiders. And starting on the Chiefs side of the game, they're 8-point favorites. This is the 2-game. Of the 2 games, this has the much higher total, 52 points. When we start by looking at Patrick Mahomes as a quarterback option, somebody who pretty clearly is going to be rating out as the QB that has the top stack odds overall on the slate, but that also comes with him being a lot pricier than the other quarterback. So however priority is Mahomes going to be for you today? And then also, how much are you going to want to differentiate relative to what his ownership is?
Yeah, so I'm actually probably going to be coming in under the field on Mahomes. We get kind of conflicting. There are different ways to approach it. Just looking at the top stacks tool, we have Mahomes at 50.5% projected ownership with a 56.3% chance of Kansas City having the top stack. So just looking at that, you'd think, okay, I want to be over the field on Mahomes. Typically, that would be the way I play it. But then the Chiefs only have a 39.3% chance of being the top value stack. So you can kind of read that different ways. Do you want to be over or under the field? I'm going to end up being under the field just because 50.5 is a lot. But honestly, you could lock in Mahomes. It would not be the wrong decision. I think that you can play this slate a lot of different ways and still make plus EV lineups and have a shot at winning some real money. So I think I'll be under the field on Mahomes and taking some shots on these other quarterbacks. But if you locked in Mahomes, I don't think that would be wrong either. He's pretty clearly the likelihood of Patrick Mahomes being the highest scoring quarterback, of the Chiefs having the highest scoring stack, very high here. We have a 96 rating on the Chiefs stack. So definitely not wrong if you want to be over the field. How do you think you're going to be approaching Mahomes?
Probably pretty close to the field, just based on the fact that when I ran lineups, I just ended up getting just eerily similar exposure to him as the field on both DraftKings and FanDuel. So FanDuel, for instance, we have him project for 43% ownership. When I ran 150 lineups, I get to him in 44%. And then over for DraftKings, about the same, where he's 50% owned. I ended up with him in 51% of lineup. So I think the ownership is about reasonable on him. The one thing that always becomes, a give and pull with him that we talk about all the time with Mahomes is who are we stacking him with, right? Because we've got the wide receivers have been super, super hard to nail down. We do know Mecole Hardman is going to be out again. Travis Kelce's been great. I made the point last week that I do kind of stand by, and we could talk about the running backs here, that Jerick McKinnon is kind of one of the top wide receivers for the team. He just has running back eligibility. So I don't think people have been stacking Mahomes with Jerick McKinnon frequently enough, just because he does kind of serve as a pass catcher for them. We saw last week, 6 targets, caught 5 of them for 52 yards, a pair of touchdowns. So I think that is a way that you could reasonably stack up Patrick Mahomes. You can make a double stack, Mahomes, McKinnon, and then Travis Kelce, and you're essentially getting a pass catcher in Jerick McKinnon. who kind of plays a role similar to the Chiefs as what like a Deebo Samuel plays for the 49ers.
Yeah, absolutely. McKinnon is that's a good comparison there with Deebo Samuel, just in that he sort of plays multiple roles. McKinnon ran 18 routes last week, 43% of passing plays he was running routes on. The week before that, over 50%. The week prior to that, 67% of passing plays McKinnon was running routes. He is just very involved in the passing game. So I agree. You can definitely include Jerick McKinnon as a pass catcher. Isaiah Pacheco, I've been waiting for it to happen. There was chatter that they wanted to get him more involved in the passing game, and it really just hasn't happened. So I'm probably not stacking Mahomes with, I'll probably still have lineups with Mahomes and Pacheco because I like them both individually as plays, but there's no like real strong correlation between those two. Whereas, yeah, absolutely. McKinnon, as you say, is basically treated like a pass catcher. He is running a lot of routes and can be included as a stacking of partner with Mahomes. So definitely with you on McKinnon. I wanted to touch on one question that somebody asked in chat. I believe Jamal Parker. Yeah, Jamal Parker asked, did you guys leave any salary on the table when making your lineups? This is honestly something that I have been meaning to have tried to look into actually several times and haven't really gone through it. So I go and look at lineup study, and the salaries seem to be a little bit off. So sometimes I try to look at what pros are doing with their lineups. Are they leaving salary on the table in these 2-game slates? And it's a little bit hard to read. I think that I'm leaning against. So I never have forced in leaving salary on the table in 2-game slates. Is something that I've considered switching to. But after talking about it with Alex a little bit yesterday, it sounds like he is disinclined to leave salary on the table. Duplication, not generally a huge factor on a 2-game slate because there really are a ton of combos on a 2-game slate. So I don't think I will be leaving any salary on the table. How about you, Greg?
It depends what we're talking about by leaving any set, because I do feel like sometimes people take this literally and make it think that you could only build lineups that use 100% of the salary, right? So it depends what we're really talking about. Like, am I going to be built? And also, I think FanDuel and DraftKings are inherently different when we have this conversation as well, because FanDuel is so rigid in terms of positions and the price, and there's no utility spots that I think that oftentimes it's fairly easy to differentiate just by having lineups that leave a bunch of salary on the table for FanDuel purposes, especially I'm going to scroll through my FanDuel lineups right now just to kind of make a point. But all right, so here's a lineup that I had that's one of my higher projected lineups. It's a Chiefs stack and it leaves $700 in salary on the table. And I'm sure that some of these wide receivers could be upgraded. So I'll take one, for example, just looking at all of the wide receivers. We have, in terms of projections, a 0.06 difference in fantasy projection between Treylon Burks and Matt Collins. There's $600 different in salary, though. If you have a lineup, though, that leaves $600 in salary on the table with Matt Collins, which is what I just looked at in this lineup here. It has $700 in salary on the table. It has Matt Collins in it. It does not have Treylon Burks. But to me, there's almost no differentiation between these two in terms of what the projection is, but there's a pretty big difference in the salary. So I don't view them as being different plays, and I would have no issue there if you were hand building a lineup to leave that $600 in salary on the table. And I assume that would make it a much less popular lineup that is less likely to be duped on a 2-game slate, at least for FanDuel purposes. DraftKings, just because of how flexible the positions are, it's easier to make unique lineups. FanDuel, though, I'm just going to be more inclined to leave salary on the table because it just happens a lot where you're going to get players that are $600-$700 salary difference there without the ability to be as flexible in roster construction. And you're just going to get these guys that have big salary differences. So for FanDuel, it ends up happening on 2-game slates more than DraftKings, if that follows.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. So I guess I will leave salary on the table in some of my lineups. I'm just not forcing it. So it's not like on Showdown, I will set a restriction where I'm forcing it to leave salary on the table. Certainly, I'm going to have lineups that leave salary on the table today. I'm just not going to be, putting that in as something that I'm forcing in Fantasy Cruncher. So yeah, I think we're on the same page there where it's, yeah, I'll leave salary on the table for some lineups if they project well enough. It's just not something that I'm going to be forcing in. And, sometimes those 1-for-1 swaps, then you do need to be considering. So, the example you gave is just $600. But like if you have a lineup where, players, you think this player could outscore this player and you'll leave $2,000 on the table, that's great. But then that's also $2,000 you can leave in any other spot in your lineup to potentially upgrade. So you need to be careful about how much salary you are leaving on the table on a 2-game slate.
Yeah, and by the way, kind of similar to Showdown, another one for me is when I'm building on my MMA lineups, I rarely play lineups for MMA that have all of the salary being used because those lineups are almost assuredly going to be duped really heavily.
Yep.
So 2 game slate, once again, more so for FanDuel. If you're building a lineup that has all the salary on the table, pretty good chance that it's going to be duplicated with other people. Not quite the same for DraftKings just because of how flexible the lineup constructions are. But getting into some of these running backs now for the Chiefs, we've got Isaiah Pacheco. We've got Jerick McKinnon to look at. We were just talking about McKinnon before. He's my preferred option for this team. And somebody that when you and I have been doing our tournament strategy show for, the last few weeks, I said, people have to stop thinking of McKinnon as a running back. He's a player who takes snaps out of the backfield, but also runs a whole lot of pass catching routes for this team. And you could effectively call him the number 2 pass catching option for Patrick Mahomes behind Travis Kelce over the last few weeks, a guy who we've regularly seen 6, 7, 8 targets per game for. So I really do like McKinnon as a pass catching stack with Mahomes, and I prefer him to Pacheco for today.
Yep, I like both actually quite a bit, and I want to give a shout. I see Eric Lindquist in chat. I gotta say, Eric was on the Jerick McKinnon train like before it really took off. Like he called the first big game for Jerick McKinnon before I was really on him, and now McKinnon has been just pretty consistently great. He's been on the field so much. Like we already talked about how many routes he's been running. He's not that involved really as a running back. Like we said he's kind of similar to Deebo Samuel in that he does both. He runs and he catches passes. The past 2 weeks, just 5 and 2 carries for Jerick McKinnon, but the week prior to that, 10 carries. And of course, as we said, he's been targeted a ton recently. The past 4 games, 9 targets in week 14, then 8, 3, and 6. He's just very involved in this Chiefs offense, and I expect him to continue to be very involved in the Chiefs offense. Isaiah Pacheco, not nearly as involved in the passing game, but he's clearly running more routes than Isaiah McKinnon. Jerick McKinnon.
Combined them. That would be like the old Patriots situation where we had like Rex Burkhead and who's
Ben Jarvis Green Ellis. Was that
yeah, exactly. And it was these guys it was impossible to figure out who would ever get the usage in any one game. And it was like, if we can only combine them together, kind of what you did right there with Isaiah McKinnon. But yeah, that would be nice if we get Pacheco and McKinnon together as one running back. And also, by the way, one other thing to mention, Pacheco is more popular in both FanDuel and DraftKings in our ownership projections, which even more so leads me towards McKinnon.
I'm scared to say that I like McKinnon after doing the strategy show with Alex yesterday, and he was all about Pacheco. He liked Pacheco so much more than McKinnon. But these tools that Alex created, I got to look at those too. And Pacheco actually both have slight negative leverage, but we've got Pacheco coming in higher owned than McKinnon, which makes me a little bit more inclined to play McKinnon. He is obviously 700 more expensive on DraftKings, which, it's a tougher build with McKinnon, but as we've talked about, you can certainly pair him with Mahomes. He is used so much as a pass catcher. We have, slight negative leverage on both these guys. 48% ownership for Pacheco, 44% chance of being optimal, 40% ownership for McKinnon, 38% chance of being optimal. I still think both are certainly in play and going to be a big part of my lineups. Like we just don't have many great mid-range options. We don't really have any other great mid-range options besides those guys. Like those guys, the next up above McKinnon is Travis Etienne, I guess 667, not a huge price gap there. But then after Pacheco at 5,600, who do you really want to play? I mean, I mentioned Zamir White as somebody that I might actually consider playing him some just because of the conflicting narratives and Las Vegas having nothing to play for, and Josh Jacobs, not having a contract, maybe not wanting to get hurt here. I don't know. I might play a little bit of Zamir White, but it's a thin play. I don't think we have any strong plays below Isaiah Pacheco's 5,600. So I think both guys are going to be a big part of my lineups just because of the price tags, and obviously they're on the best offense on the slate wanting to win the game.
All right, we've got we're going to talk about the pass catchers for the Chiefs in a second, which is something that I never enjoy talking about because we've been down this path how many times now, Neil, when we do these shows together, we try to figure out who the pass catcher is for the Chiefs, and then we end up finding out at the end of the slate it's always none of them. But we got a super chat first from our guy Zachary Arrell Kelly, and he I'm assuming this is a showdown question. That would make sense. He's asking for FanDuel, Scantling and Stidham, or McKinnon and Carlson FanDuel. So yeah, I think it stands to reason that this is going to be for the 1-game slate because he's got a kicker there in Daniel Carlson. So let me look at some of the ownerships and the optimal scores that we have for that game in the top showdown tool that we have, which I do think is one of the more useful tools we have for any sport. Yeah. When I'm playing more heavy showdown lineups, I'll definitely use this to help set my different exposures in large field tournaments, where I'll look at this, be like, okay, which players are over-owned, which players are under-owned, and definitely helps me as a baseline in terms of which guys I want to give the thumbs up or thumbs down in Fantasy Cruncher. And if you guys do want access to it, we do have our 5-day free trial that is going to cover our showdown tools, the main slate as well. So if you were to sign up for this right now, you would get the showdown slates for today. You would also get the main slate for today, as well as the main slate for tomorrow, and all of the other contests that DraftKings puts out there, and FanDuel as well. But for this question, he wants to know Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Jared Stidham, or Jerick McKinnon and Daniel Carlson. So looking over at some of the FanDuel numbers here, MVS looks like a fairly neutral play. Jared Stidham also a little bit neutral. We have McKinnon going a little bit over-owned in large field tournaments. Carlson, I'm going to lean towards the Stidham and MVS side.
Okay. Yeah. I think that it's a very close call. And really, the best answer that I could give is it depends on the rest of the lineup. But in a vacuum, that sounds like the right answer. Yeah.
So let's talk about these pass catchers, Neil. And it's always so hard because of how much Patrick Mahomes has spread the ball out this year. If we do have to pull one positive from this, Mecole Hardman's out right now. Sky Moore is out. So it does make it, a little bit more condensed, as opposed to being like, oh my God, we've got 7 pass catchers to choose from for the Chiefs. And, Travis Kelce, when we get to tight end, is clearly the number 1 pass catcher. But if you had to pair him with one of his wide receivers, which stands out the most?
I mean, it's pretty clearly Juju Smith-Schuster is the wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs. So it'd probably be Juju. But honestly, there are a number of receivers. And of course, I fell for this trap all year buying into these Chiefs receivers, and they kept on putting up points, and it was rarely any of these receivers doing anything. But I actually have a lot of interest in a number of these receivers. Once again, if I had to just pick one and I have enough salary, it's going to be Juju Smith-Schuster. He clearly has the best odds of having a great game. He's got the highest floor. I don't know if you could say he has the highest ceiling. They all have, I think, pretty high ceilings. Probably Juju has the highest. But regardless, I think Juju is the one who is likeliest to have a big game here. We have him in the optimal lineup 47% of the time. He is the most expensive. He's 5,400, but that's accounted for in the optimal lineup rate. So it's probably Juju Smith-Schuster if I have to just pick one. But honestly, I like a number of these Chiefs receivers again, because Mecole Hardman is out. I think MVS looks great at 3,900. He's projected for 30% ownership. We have him optimal 32% of the time. The Raiders are relatively weak against slot receivers, which MVS will be playing that role, I think, pretty much exclusively with Mecole Hardman out. That's not something that I don't really focus too much on where receivers are playing generally, but I know that this is a great spot for MVS, and he's only 3,900 in a game where the Chiefs are going to put up a lot of points. So our tools like him, every indicator is that MVS should have a great game. He's let us down many times already this year. He could do it again, but I'm going right back there to MVS. I'm going to have to play some Kadarius Toney. Doesn't look great in the tools. 25% projected ownership, 20% chance to be an optimal. But again, with both Mecole Hardman and Sky Moore out, I think that Kadarius Toney probably takes on a bigger role than he has been playing. He only ran 13 routes last week. That's 31% route participation, not very high. And he had 4 targets on those 13 routes, including 2 in the red zone. And I think with both Sky Moore and Mecole Hardman out, again, I think that we could see Sky Moore's role continue to grow on this Chiefs offense. And in 13 routes, I should say, is the highest he's had. In week 15, he ran 3 routes, week 16, 7 routes, and then week 17, 13 routes. So he has been progressing upward in terms of his route participation for the Chiefs. And I would expect that to continue, especially with 2 of the other receivers out. So I do have some interest in Kadarius Toney. I'd say that those 3 are Juju, MVS, and Kadarius Toney. Yep. And those 3 are the 3 that I primarily have interest in. Justin Watson, I think, is just a large field dart throw. Actually, I want to see what his participation has been recently, because it feels like he's taken on kind of a lesser role in the offense, which kind of expected as Kadarius Toney is more and more involved. He still did run 12 routes last week, 19 the week before, 20 the week prior to that. So he has still been out there. I think you could consider Justin Watson as well. Do you think you would go to any Justin Watson?
Not Justin Watson, particularly not because I know most of the people are watching are playing, 1, 3, 5 lineups. So like,
Sure.
I would not be considering Justin Watson in that kind of scenario, but I would for Kadarius Toney, especially on FanDuel. So MVS is fairly popular on FanDuel, $5,400. He's projected for around 40% ownership, sub 20% ownership on Kadarius Toney on FanDuel. So you're getting him at half the ownership of MVS. Before you had said that you thought that Juju was the highest upside wide receiver. I actually think it's Kadarius Toney on the Chiefs. Now, his odds of hitting that ceiling are extremely low, but he's an ultra talented player. And if I'm trying to apply a week 18 narrative to this, he's not been healthy a whole lot for the Chiefs. And if there's ever been a time that I think you've really tried to get Kadarius Toney involved in the offense and see how well can he mesh with Patrick Mahomes, how viable is he as a postseason weapon for us, I think this is the time that you dust him off and you really get him involved in the offense. So once again, like these are not talking points for most of the regular season, but week 18, where I do think narratives end up becoming a little bit more preeminent, just because teams are setting themselves up for the postseason or for the future. And if I was coaching the Chiefs in this scenario, I would really want to get Toney involved just because I know he's so talented, and I want to get him more reps with Patrick Mahomes just to see what that would look like for them in the postseason. So I do like Toney a whole bunch for tournaments. And I think the just sub 20% on FanDuel is a pretty good ownership discount at a cheap price when we know what his upside is.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think that he's going to have a big role in this offense. I've been in like playoff best ball. I've been all about Kadarius Toney. And like we said, I think that he's going to continue taking on a bigger role in this offense. Sounds like you're on the same page. So yeah, maybe he has the higher ceiling. The reason I say Juju is that he just is going to be out on the field. Like we already know that Juju is going to be out there a lot and he's going to be targeted a lot. So just from like a PPR standpoint, I think you add in, a 100-yard bonus potentially and a touchdown, pretty huge upside. But at the price tag, like when you factor in the price tag relative to the price tag, maybe Kadarius Toney does match him or even exceed him in terms of upside. Both certainly great plays.
Some super chats to get to. But I don't know if you have anything else to add about Travis Kelce other than he's clearly the best tight end play on the slate. Try to play him. Like I don't have anything else to add. He's clearly the number one pass catching option for the Chiefs and the best tight end play by a mile.
Yeah, I mean, I started running lineups before adjusting any projections, and I got Travis Kelce in like 100% of lineups, and that's with randomness on too. Like he projects so much better than any other tight end out there. If you can afford him, you should put him in your lineup.
Got some super chats fit on now. First from Fanatic717. Could you stack Pacheco and McKinnon in the same lineup? I wouldn't do it on a bigger slate. For a 2-game slate, I don't have an issue with it. And could be a way to differentiate some lineups as well. I would say this, though. If you're playing Pacheco and McKinnon, don't also have like Juju and Kelce in the lineup, because then I think you're starting to monopolize yourself a little bit. But if you just have Pacheco and McKinnon, I don't have any kind of real problem with that.
Yep, same page. On a 2-game slate, it's something that not a lot of people are going to do. Both these guys are going to be on the field in a game they have to win in a solid matchup. So definitely with you can play both on this slate.
Jay is saying, asking, I should say, Waller, Burks, or Toney. I prefer Toney of those guys. It's going to depend a little bit who the other players are in your lineup as well, but just in a broad sense, Kadarius Toney is my preference. Do you have a strong lean, Waller, Burks, Toney?
I think I'm with you that Toney is my lean. It is very close to me. I mean, looking at the tools, Treylon Burks, we've got at 17% projected ownership, 26% chance of being optimal. So just looking at the boom bust tool, it would be Treylon Burks. But I think you and I are on the same page that we see Kadarius Toney trending upwards, and this is a game that we could just see him explode here. So I think that the upside is higher with Kadarius Toney. I think he has a slightly better quarterback with Patrick Mahomes over Josh Dobbs. So yeah, I think we're on the same page with Kadarius Toney.
And we've got Palmer Jones. He's got Stidham as the quarterback in his lineup. And then he wants to know for a 2v2, Treylon Burks and Foster Moreau or Austin Hooper and Mac Hollins. Considering you have Stidham and then also that we've got Darren Waller back for the Raiders right now, I prefer the Hooper and Hollins side. I think Hollins is a more reliable stack option with Stidham than Foster Moreau is.
Yeah, I like that one much better, to be honest. I think Matt Collins, somebody who's going to be overlooked. He's still running. Like, I think people see Hunter Renfrow back and think that Matt Collins is going to be taking a back seat, but the past 3 weeks, 80% route participation, 94% route participation, and 71% route participation. So Matt Collins still on the field plenty for the Raiders, and he's been targeted 14 times in those 3 games as well. So yeah, I definitely prefer the Matt Collins, and Austin Hooper, I think, is going to go a little bit under the radar just because people see Chigakonkwo and they want to play the sexy rookie instead of the old timer who's not as exciting to play. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Anything else you want to add from the Chiefs? If not, we will talk about the Raiders side of the game.
I mean, you could play Noah Brown. I don't think that I'm going to be Noah Gray. I don't think that I'm going to be getting there with Noah Gray, but with Jody Fortson out, he has taken on a bigger role. I think that it's actually a reasonable play. 13.6% projected ownership. Actually, I want to look at our boom bust tour real quick, but I think that he is in play. It kind of, that ownership is a little bit higher than I'd like it to be. Like if he was at like 5% projected ownership, I would definitely have a lot of interest in Noah Gray, but yeah, we have slight positive 13.6% projected ownership, 13.8% chance of being optimal. I think that Noah Gray at 2,500 is in play. He's the cheapest of any player that you can play from a skill position player standpoint at 2,500. So I do like Noah Gray a bit.
All right, so let's talk about the Raiders. But first, No House Advantage is the sponsor of today's show. If you guys have not signed up at NHA, when you sign up using our link, you can get up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. And you can get access to a whole bunch of overlay that you're not going to find at FanDuel or DraftKings, because pretty regularly, the No House Advantage contests are only filling up a halfway, 3/4 of the way, 2/3 of the way, stuff like that. So if you want access to overlay, which you probably do, sign up at No House Advantage and use our link. And then also, we make it as easy as possible for you guys to enter your lineups from the tools we have over at Stokastic.com, because we've got pre-built NHA lineups you can make a couple selections from. You could download the CSV and you just upload it right into NHA, take advantage of that overlay and make a bunch of lineups really quickly. And then also, Now Advantage has props that you could play against the house. So if you don't have access to sports betting in your state, good news. NHA probably has you covered and you can play some of their props against the house, which we also have projections for over at Stokastic.com. Let's talk about the Raiders side of the game. And when it comes to Jarrett Stidham as a quarterback option, pick up a good amount of ownership today. So over on FanDuel, he's actually projected for 22% ownership. Over at DraftKings, 17%. So I know it's a 2-game slate and we don't have that many options at quarterback, but still kind of surprising for me to see Stidham come in around the 20% mark. I guess people are kind of looking towards, number one, the game script, where we expect the Raiders to have to throw in the game. And he threw 34 times for 365 yards last week. So relative to the ownership on Jarrett Stidham, do you like him as a cost-saving option at QB?
I do. It's a great matchup as well versus the Chiefs. The game script is right. We've got him projected for 18% ownership with a 22% chance of Vegas being the top stack. He obviously has great receiving options in Devontae Adams, and Darren Waller has, he scored a touchdown last week, didn't do much else, but we know that Darren Waller has some upside. I like Hunter Renfrow coming back. Matt Collins, as I said, still looks good. So a lot of pretty solid pass catching options for Jarrett Stidham, and we have positive leverage. As I said, 18% ownership. We also have a 24% chance of being the top value stack as well. So a lot of things that I actually do like about Jarrett Stidham, and he'll allow you to also play the Travis Kelce's of the world. I guess if you stack him up with Devontae Adams, not quite so cheap, but with Travis Kelce there on a run back, I think you can make some really good Jarrett Stidham lineups as well.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that it does enable you to is obviously spend up at other spots. Like if you're playing Stidham as opposed to Patrick Mahomes at QB, easier to get to Travis Kelce as your tight end. So that is one of the benefits of Stidham, is just him being cost effective. Now, as far as Jacobs goes at running back, I find it really difficult to get to him. He is super expensive, and I also question what his workload is going to be. I know that he's playing today, but it's hard for me to think that he's going to get a full workload. And I think that this is the spot to work Zamir White in a little bit more for the Raiders. They spent good draft capital on him this year. They spent enough draft capital on him to the point where people were skeptical of whether Josh Jacobs was even going to be the starting running back all year this season, because they had invested in Zamir White. So a lot of people are playing in yearly leagues. We're playing in best ball this year. We're kind of off of Josh Jacobs and even drafting Zamir White under the assumption that he was going to be a starter at some point in the year. Obviously, not has that not been the case. Jacobs has absolutely destroyed everybody, but I kind of do feel differently this week. I think we're going to see a downtick in Josh Jacobs' workload. It's the final week of the season. He's banged up. He's dealing with personal issues. Not to say that Zamir White all of a sudden becomes some must-play type guy, but I don't really like Josh Jacobs much.
Yeah, so I was definitely one of those drafting Zamir White and not drafting Josh Jacobs. Pretty big offseason mistake there. In this game, it's really tough. So I mean, we have Josh Jacobs 15% projected ownership, 22% chance to be an optimal. However, this is really difficult to gauge what the situation is. So that's based on I don't know what we're assuming there in terms of Jacobs' workload, but I'll say this: nobody knows what Jacobs' workload is going to be, so it makes it pretty tough. I don't know. It's a little bit tough for me to really want to fade him at 15.2% projected ownership just because we know the upside is there. So I think I have more interest than you do in Josh Jacobs. He clearly at 7,400 with a potentially diminished workload. It's scary playing Josh Jacobs, but in a large field GPP. So I think that I'm with you that I definitely wouldn't play him in like a small field contest. He's not going to be a cash game option, but in the largest field GPPs, I actually think that Josh Jacobs is a pretty solid option at 15.2% projected ownership, just because we know if this same game were happening in like week 12, we'd be all on board. We'd be jamming in Josh Jacobs at 7,400. He'd be the best running back option on the slate probably. And now it's just we have a lot of questions about what the workload is going to be. Are they going to work Zamir White in there more? I'll say this though, when the report came out that Zamir White could have a big workload, at that point Josh Jacobs was questionable. So we were thinking that Josh Jacobs might not play, and I don't know if that was a factor. If they were saying that, even assuming that Josh Jacobs is going to be in, but I think that I have more interest in Josh Jacobs than you do, and our boom bust tool would suggest that he's got some positive leverage. Like I said, it's certainly more volatile. Like I love the boom bust tool, something that I rely on a lot, but in situations like this, we have to acknowledge like nobody really knows what to expect from Josh Jacobs. So it's not quite as meaningful as usual, but at 15% ownership, I think on a 2-game slate, I have more interest than you do in Josh Jacobs.
My preference is going to be Zamir White. Also, not that he's a priority on the slate, but he's really cheap, and I wouldn't be shocked if he plays more snaps and gets more touches than Josh Jacobs. It's once again, I'm just kind of trying to read some of the narratives, which I hate to do as part of, analysis, because it's typically not what we do, is we try to be more math inclined. We try to be more analytics inclined. But if there's ever a point in time where some of that shit kind of goes out the window, it's week 18 of the football season, where we've even seen teams that are like, hey, this guy needs 7 catches for a $1 million bonus. We're going to make sure he gets his 7 catches. And it's just stuff that matters at this point in the season. And it doesn't seem to make a whole ton of sense to run Josh Jacobs into the ground in this kind of scenario. Whereas Zamir White, a rookie, they used draft capital on him. They didn't really get a good chance to see what they have in him. I kind of think now's the time to give him a go. So that's going to be my lean, is Zamir White as the running back for the Raiders. I think he's a decent large field tournament option. As far as the wide receivers go, I feel better about Davante Adams as a pay-up option than I do Josh Jacobs, but I still prefer other pay-up options on the slate. So if I'm only getting to one Raiders pass catcher today, the one I have the most exposure to is Matt Collins. How about for yourself?
Yeah, so I actually like all of these guys to some extent. I'm with you on Matt Collins, just somebody that is going to go a little bit overlooked because people see Hunter Renfrow back. Early in the year, I was under the assumption that Matt Collins was going to go away when Hunter Renfrow came back. That hasn't been the case, though. He continues to be extremely involved for the Raiders. We're projecting him for just 19.7% ownership at 4,300 with the season he's had. I think that's a really nice price tag and low ownership for Matt Collins. So I'm with you that I do like Matt Collins quite a bit. But I mean, hard to call him my favorite when we've got Hunter Renfrow at 3,800 getting just 15% ownership. I actually think that Hunter Renfrow is probably the one that I would call my favorite, just at a little bit lower ownership and lower salary. He's been involved less than Matt Collins the past few weeks, but he's still been on the field, 60+% of passing plays he's been running routes. So I think that is probably Hunter Renfrow for me, but it's honestly kind of a toss-up. I do like Matt Collins quite a bit as well. And of course, Davante Adams, we know who he is. He is the alpha receiver for the Raiders. He's 8,800 in a great matchup. Doesn't have his quarterback here, so that's the knock against Davante Adams, is at 8,800 with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. It's a little bit scary, but I still do. I'm going to be playing some Davante Adams, and currently I am just slightly under the field on Davante Adams.
Yeah, and to be clear, when I ran lineups, I got to Davante Adams just less than the field because he's so popular, nearly 40% on FanDuel, DraftKings 34%. So it wasn't that he didn't show up. I just didn't get to him as much as the field. And then the opportunity cost too. Like, my favorite pass catcher of the entire slate is Travis Kelce, just because of the positionality. And then also just he's the player that's made the most sense to stack with Patrick Mahomes as of late. And one of the opportunity costs of going heavy on Davante Adams it's kind of difficult to build lineups that have both Adams and Kelsey in them just because they're both so expensive. So I ended up being a little bit underweight to the field on Devontae Adams. In Mahomes stacks, I was more apt to run it back with Mac Hollins or Hunter Renfrow, who you just mentioned. As far as the tight ends go, it's kind of a mess for me with Darren Waller back. Once again, if you have the space for it, the preference is just to spend up for Travis Kelsey. But Waller's been hurt so much this year, and then he's just disappeared in some of the games that he's played in. Derek Carr isn't the quarterback anymore. We've got Stidham in there. So the tight ends, if you get a couple of lineups here and there, that's fine. But I can't really say I prioritize Waller or Moreau tonight.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. I do have interest in Darren Waller. Man, 14% ownership. I think that I'm going to be above the field on Darren Waller just because I think the talent is there. The matchup is great against the Chiefs. We have him actually looking a little bit over owned, and this is a spot where I think the tools are a little bit, we can rely on the tools a little bit more in a spot with like Darren Waller at 4,400. We've got him a 14.4% projected ownership, 11.6% chance of being optimal. I think this is different than the Josh Jacobs situation where that is meaningful. Like we kind of know what to expect a little bit more from Darren Waller. So the tools would suggest that he's a little bit over owned. I think that the field that probably has it about right on Darren Waller, 14.4% projected ownership. They really do have a lot of mouths to feed in Vegas. I don't think I'm going to be going to Foster Moreau at all. So if it comes down to those two, it's going to be Waller for me. But I don't think I'm going to be getting much more than the field there.
Is there anything else you want to add about the Raiders side of this game?
I mean, you mentioned Zamir White. I am playing some Zamir White as well. So I think you can kind of hedge your bets in different ways, play some Josh Jacobs lineups, some Zamir White lineups. Outside of those, I think we talked about all of the receiving options that I have interest in. No, I think we covered it pretty well.
All right, so we're going to talk about the final game on the slate. I'm actually looking forward to this one. This is one with some implications. A bet that I thought was dead a long time ago. I bet the Jacksonville Jaguars at 10-1 to win the division before the season started, and it looked really good at the beginning of the year. And then it got so bad, I kind of forgot I'd placed the bet after a few weeks after that. And then I'm looking through my futures portfolio just to see, like, all right, what are my rooting interests heading into the final week of the NFL season? And I was like, oh, I've got this long shot Jaguars ticket that's fairly likely to win now. They win this game, they win the division. So fun game between the Jaguars and the Titans. Winner is going to win the AFC South. So definitely something that's going to matter in terms of before we're talking about what are the motivations of a team like the Raiders. We don't really know. We know what it is for the Jaguars and the Titans. Before we start talking about the game, if you guys want an easy way to get access to our tools, we've got our deal with BetMGM where if you sign up by using our link, you're going to get 2 free months of Stokastic Plus Platinum. And that covers all of the sports and all of the tools we have for every sport. NFL, NBA, baseball, that'll be starting up in a few months. We've got that covered. So basically every single DFS sport out there, we've got ownership projections. We've got player projections. And we've got lots of other unique tools as well, like the Boom Bust tool that Neil has been referencing. And you guys can get 2 months free access when you sign up at BetMGM using our link. And that'll only take a $10 deposit over at BetMGM. But also, your first bet at BetMGM, even if it loses, you're going to get refunded with a risk-free bet of up to $1,000. Just make sure when you sign up there, use our link because you're going to need that to get credit with the 2 free months and the risk-free bet. But let's hit on the Tennessee Titans and a little bit dicey at quarterback, to say the least. We saw Malik Willis start. That went poorly. Now we got Joshua Dobbs. Here's what I think the Titans are going to do today. They are going to make this as slow a paced game as possible. They're going to give the ball to Derrick Henry as much as possible. I cannot imagine that they're going to trust Josh Dobbs to try to make plays. And I'm not even convinced he's going to start the entire game. If he struggles, Malik Willis is probably going to come in at some point. So considering the stakes of the game and how thin the leash is, I cannot have interest in the quarterback spot here.
So here's where we differ once again. So it's obviously a long shot play. I do think that Josh Dobbs, because he's the cheapest quarterback on the slate at 5,100, and because he has shown some rushing upside, albeit not really at the pro level. He did not, I think he rushed like 3 times for 12 yards, something like that last week. But I think that just because of the under 5% ownership on a 2-game slate as the cheapest quarterback, I think that there are paths to Josh Dobbs actually having success here. Just looking through his college rushing stats, his senior year, which was 2016. So, you can take it with a grain of salt to some extent, but his senior year rushed for 830 yards and 12 touchdowns, senior year of college. Again, that I'll repeat, this was 6 years ago. He maybe isn't quite as spry as he was back then, but still, not an old guy. And if nobody else is going to play as though Josh Dobbs has rushing upside, I think that's when I want to jump on board when he's under 5% owned on a 2-game slate. So I actually do have a little bit of interest in Josh Dobbs in this matchup. He also threw the ball pretty well last week. He was surprisingly successful last week. So I'm with you that there is some risk that he gets removed partially through the game. But if you're playing Josh Dobbs, you're making the bet that he's going to play well. So I think that he is somebody that I'm going to have some exposure to, at least above the field when the field is at 5%, and just hope that he does show that rushing upside. And although he did not, as I said last week, he rushed for like 12 yards or something, wasn't successful. He did have a 25-yard rush that got called back due to offensive holding. So he did like show that, yes, he's willing to run some. And I just hope that at some point he's going to break out a little bit more. So just due to the price tag, the low ownership, I'm actually somewhat interested in Josh Dobbs. I don't usually play quarterbacks naked. I think this is a situation where you could consider it. I'd probably still stack him with at least one receiver generally.
And then I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but if you are going to be stacking with a wide receiver, who is your preference? Because I don't think there's too much to say about Derrick Henry. He's, to me, pretty clearly the best running back play on the slate. To me, Derrick Henry is at running back with Travis Kelce as a tight end. They're both going to be crazy popular. People are saying in chat, like, oh, there's all this ownership going to Kelce or all this ownership going to Henry. It's a 2-game slate. A lot of dudes are really popular. It's kind of hard to say I'm only going to play contrarian guys on 2-game slate. It doesn't exist. There aren't that many players. Like, I think that Derrick Henry and Travis Kelce are both fine chalk options today. So Derrick Henry, is he overall your favorite running back? And then we can just talk about some of these pass catchers.
Yeah, I think Derrick Henry is the running back I'm going to have the most exposure to. Yeah, I think I would call him my favorite. As far as stacking options with Josh Dobbs, it's probably still Treylon Burks, but it is close with Robert Woods. We saw Robert Woods in the only game they played together. Dobbs targeted Woods 9 times last week, including 3 times in the red zone, scored a touchdown. They seem to have a little bit of a connection, but again, that's a 1-week sample size. So I'm going to lean on the tools a little bit here. And our tools would suggest Treylon Burks probably the better option. He's only 100 more than Robert Woods. Projected for 17% ownership is Burks with a 26% chance of being optimal. So I'm going to take the positive leverage on Treylon Burks and probably go there over Robert. I think he might be questionable, so I should say we'll have to keep an eye on the news there, but I think I would be inclined to go to Burks first, but it's honestly pretty close between Burks and Woods for me after the week that Woods had last week.
Yeah, by the way, the verbiage that we got from Mike Vrabel when he was talking about Treylon Burks is that he told reporters that he thinks Burks will be okay for Saturday. So definitely some risk involved, but considering the questionable tag, I think we're going to see him be really low owned. I think he's by far the most talented pass catcher that's on Tennessee. So I think he is a reasonable way to differentiate lineups at low ownership because, like you said, Treylon Burks, we got him projected for 13% ownership over on FanDuel. DraftKings, he is projected for 17% ownership. Fairly low relative to 2-game slate. In my lineups, I'm overweight to him on both sides. So Treylon Burks is going to be my preferred pass catcher from the Titans. Are you doing anything with the tight ends here?
Austin Hooper would be my preference of these tight ends. I think Chigakonkwo, the one that people are going to be more inclined to play, but Hooper has been on the field a bit more recently, and he's just kind of old hat. Like I think that these are the players that sometimes I like to target in DFS, just not somebody that you really want to play because he's been in the league forever. He's, kind of underwhelmed, but last week ran 27 routes at 66% route participation on passing plays. He was targeted 6 times in that game and not projected for a ton of ownership. So I do have some interest in Austin Hooper. Actually, I want to look up what Okonkwo's participation was because he's had some good games. Like we've seen Okonkwo actually break out several large plays, so I think that he's playable as well. My preference being Hooper, but yeah, actually the past 2 weeks Okonkwo has been down to 7 and 8 routes run, 26% and 20% route participation. So he after seeing 50% in the 3 games prior to these latest 2, he dropped down quite a bit, and Hooper seems to have taken on that bigger role. So Hooper, my preference. You could go to Okonkwo, but a large field dart throw only.
And by the way, for people who are saying Travis Kelce is too popular, he's picking up also. This is why. These are where a lot of the other tight end options are. Now, we're about to break down the Jacksonville Jaguars, who also have a very good tight end, but also one that's really popular because we're going to talk about Evan Ingram in a little bit, and he's picking up 40% ownership on DraftKings and 50% on FanDuel. I do think this is a slate where it's viable to make 2 tight end rosters for sure. But let's talk about Trevor Lawrence right now, quarterback. So relative to the other QBs we've talked about, where does Trevor Lawrence fit in the mix for you as a priority?
I think that he's certainly the second safest option at quarterback after obviously Patrick Mahomes. He's a relatively high priority. So I'm actually spreading out my quarterback exposure a little bit. But we have 27% ownership on Trevor Lawrence, only a 20% chance of Jacksonville being the top stack, but a 28% chance of being the top value stack. So in terms of value, a little bit of positive leverage. I would say, and where is he in terms of priority? So I think Mahomes is a clear priority one. I think for me, Trevor Lawrence is going to be lost in the shuffle just a little bit. Although actually looking at 26%, I'm actually going to be above the field on Trevor Lawrence because I'm going under the field on Patrick Mahomes. I am going to be above the field on Trevor Lawrence, just not to the same extent as the other quarterbacks. I think that he has the second highest floor, probably the second highest ceiling as well. He's only going to get lost in the shuffle for me a little bit because the other 2 quarterbacks outside of Mahomes are just getting such low ownership that I'm going to be above the field more on those guys than Trevor Lawrence. That's probably not the best explanation of my level of interest. I would say he's my number 2 in terms of floor and ceiling of these quarterbacks.
Yeah, and in terms of Lawrence, I do think he's a little bit different looking on FanDuel compared to DraftKings because if I'm paying up for a quarterback on FanDuel, I accidentally closed my tab, he's 8,000. But at that point, I'd just rather get some homes, especially because Lawrence is picking up a whole bunch of ownership. So he's easy for me to get to on DraftKings, where he's only $6,100. A little bit tough at FanDuel, considering where his ownership and price point is. If I'm going to go chalky and expensive at quarterback, I would rather just play Patrick Mahomes, at least as far as FanDuel goes. DraftKings second highest priority at QB from behind Patrick Mahomes now. And now as far as running backs go, not a lot of running backs that we see that we could really count on for playing a big workload. Derrick Henry certainly being one of them. And then Etienne figures to be another one. He is $7,300 over on FanDuel and projected for a whole bunch of ownership, 56%. And then at the running back spot over at DraftKings projected for 49% ownership. So I think everybody knows that Etienne, relative to the size of the slate, is a good option. He's reliable. If you guys are playing cash games, you probably want Etienne in there. But for tournaments, are you going to be over or underweight to him when he's projected to be in about half the field's lineups?
Yeah, I'm going to be underweight to the field on Travis Etienne. It's such a tough spot against Tennessee. Like, they're so good at stopping the rush. They're second in terms of rush DVOA per Football Outsiders. It's a really tough spot. So I'm going to be underweight to the 49% field that 49% ownership that the field is getting to on Travis Etienne. He's still he's relatively high floor, high. I don't know if I can even say that. Does he have a high floor against this Tennessee? I don't know that he does have a high floor, but he is going to be involved both in the passing game and the running game. With that high of ownership, I'm pretty easily going to be coming in under the field on Travis Etienne. Also, because that's one place that you and I differ is I am interested in Josh Jacobs. I'm going to be above the field on Josh Jacobs and under the field on Travis Etienne. Just kind of one of the stands I'm taking on this slate. Could certainly be way wrong on both. But for me, Etienne, one of the bigger fades. I'm going to be under the field on him more than almost any other player on the slate. Actually, Mahomes being the other one, but I'm more confident in Mahomes than Etienne. I'm not even confident that Etienne is going to have a big game here, much less outscore all of these other running backs. So my interest level in Etienne is relatively low. I think I'm still going to be above like 30%, but just barely, and the field getting there 49% of the time. How about you? What's your level of interest there?
Yeah. So, I mean, once again, relative to other running backs, the interest is high. But like you, when I ran builds, I ended up coming in underweight to the field on him just because he's so popular, right? And there's a point too where I can't play 100% of every single chalk option today. So I think the point that you had mentioned about where you were at on ETN is definitely resonates with me, because that's where I got to him too when I built lineups, was right around 30% on DraftKings, 35% on FanDuel. So once again, that's a hefty portion of a player, but still barely over half of what the field has, just because if I'm playing a chalky running back, my preference is to go to Derrick Henry. And if you compare right now also the ownerships between these guys, Henry's 35% owned on FanDuel in our projections compared to 56% for ETN. And then if you look at DraftKings, we've got ETN also being more popular, 49% relative to 43% for Derrick Henry. So I'll take the slight ownership discount on Derrick Henry, who I think is looking at a massive, massive workload today in both the running game and the passing game. So that's going to be my preference if I'm going to a chalky running back in this game. Now, as far as the pass catchers go for the Jaguars, we've got the guys here. This seems like where most people are looking to find value at wideout. Christian Kirk is projected for 37% ownership on DK. Zay Jones projected for 41% ownership. If we talk about the ownership for these guys right now on FanDuel, got Kirk projected for 27%, Zay Jones at 37%, Marvin Jones right around 20%. Who's your preferred pass catcher as far as the wide receivers go from the Jaguars?
Yeah, I mean, clearly Christian Kirk is the wide receiver one for the Jaguars. I'm going to have the highest exposure to Christian Kirk. I think I'm actually well above the field. Yeah, I'm actually, I have Christian Kirk in more than half of my lineups. He's the receiver that I have the most interest in for the Jaguars. After Kirk, Zay Jones, the wide receiver two, he's been pretty great recently. He's been on the field plenty the past 4 games. 90% route participation, 88%, just 69% in week 16 against the Jets, and then 77% in week 17. So he's been very involved for the Jaguars. I'd say he's the wide receiver 2 and the receiver from the Jags that I have the second most interest in. Marvin Jones is playable, not as high of a priority as Kirk and Zay Jones. I'll also say I think Jamal Agnew is somebody that you could play in just the largest field GPPs. Certainly a little bit thin, and I don't think that I'm getting to any of him currently, but somebody that you could definitely consider. And maybe I'll pivot to him later on, depending on how the earlier part of the slate goes. But he's been on the field a little bit, just around about 5 routes run per game recently. So not a high confidence play in Jamal Agnew, but he usually gets at least one target. It's been week 9 was the last time he didn't get a single target in a game, and he's a guy that can break a play open pretty easily. So in the large field GPP, you consider Agnew as well.
And then is there anything else you want to talk about as far as the wide receivers go? And then we'll talk about Evan Ingram in a second as well.
No, I think that we've covered. I think those are the 4 receivers that are playable for the Jags.
All right, so let's talk about Ingram, who has really been a revelation for the Jaguars in the second half of the season, has really quickly become a favorite target of Trevor Lawrence. And Ingram's always been, a really talented player. He was somebody with the Giants. He was a high draft pick at one point, always was super athletic, struggled to catch wide open passes, had a ton of drops. It was always an issue for him when he was with the Giants, but has seemed to build up a really good rapport with Jacksonville and with Trevor Lawrence. But the field is clearly aware of this because he's projected for 41% ownership on DraftKings. FanDuel, Evan Ingram is projected for 50% ownership. My preference if I'm going to a chalk tight end is going to be Travis Kelce, but I do think it's perfectly viable to make lineups that have both Ingram and Kelce in them, especially because we just don't have that many running backs to feel great about today. So usually when I'm building lineups on Sunday where we have a lot of options, not because I'm forcing it or anything, just because it's the players who project the best, I end up with a lot of running backs in the flex spot. But for this week, it's going to be a little bit different on this 2-gamer. So I think Ingram and Kelce lineups, definitely viable, but my preference for the chalk tight ends is going to be Travis Kelce.
Yeah, definitely Travis Kelce, the higher priority here. I was just looking at my lineups to see how much Ingram I was getting to as you brought up. I have 65% Evan Ingram right now, and I didn't do anything to his projection. Like I don't think I want 65% Evan Ingram. I'm probably gonna maybe run one more crunch to try and get under that. But he certainly projects extremely well. He's been really building a rapport with Trevor Lawrence the past 4 games, not counting week 17 because they didn't really play the full game, but the past 4 games prior to that, 7 targets, 15 targets in week 14, 10 in week 15, and then 8 in week 16. Just been so involved in the offense for the Jaguars, and he's been doing well. So, the drops haven't been as big of an issue recently. Hard not to have interest in Evan Ingram. He actually projects better than Darren Waller, which surprised me a little bit. I think given the disparity in ownership, I'm going to try to get a little bit closer between those two, get a little bit under the field maybe on Evan Ingram, or at least certainly not 65%, maybe closer to the field, than try to get above the field on Darren Waller. But it's a great spot. Great, Tennessee, one of the worst in the league in terms of pass DVOA. So I get it why the field is playing 41%. I think that I'm probably going to be pretty close there.
Yeah, and we got a question from GoBlue112 in our Discord channel. It says, how much do you guys like 2 tight end builds, and are you getting to them a lot? Certainly a hell of a lot more on this slate than I normally would on a football slate. just because I mean, I think that Kelsey and Ingram are two of the better pass catching options that we have for this 2-gamer. So yeah, I don't have any kind of issue with it today. It is in terms of the actual percentage. Let me see. Let me sort some of these lineups and see.
I can tell you I'm getting 85% Kelsey, and now after running another crunch, 46% Evan Ingram. So there's definitely a lot of overlap. I'm going to have a lot of 2 tight end builds here.
Yeah, I just sorted it to see about, it looks like doing rough math in my head, 35% out of 150 lineups that I built on DraftKings have 2 tight ends in them. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean Ingram or Kelsey. That's the predominant one, but some of that is also, Austin Hooper, a couple of Darren Waller lineups in there. So I think that it's definitely something that you shouldn't be concerned if you have it for this slate. We also just got news that Deshaun Jackson waived by the Ravens, and then Nick Boyle waived by the Ravens as well. Kind of inconsequential for today, but do you have any defense takes or anything we did not bring up during this show that we should bring up before we get to lock?
Not really. So I'm currently not getting to any of the Raiders after talking about them yesterday as a team that I might consider playing. And I don't think I'm going to force it in now this close to lock, but I don't hate the idea of playing the Raiders in a lineup that allows you to, like, against Patrick Mahomes, in a lineup that allows you to play Mahomes and Kelsey and Juju in the same lineup. I don't think it's the worst idea in the world to, I guess here's my defensive take. I am allowing for up to 4 players on offense against the opposing defense. I kind of throw out the defenses versus offensive players in a 2-game slate, more so than it sounded like Alex in the conversation we had yesterday. He still is disinclined to play defense against the opposing quarterback. I think that I am okay with playing some defense against the opposing quarterback and mostly spreading it out. I set my cap at 40% on this 2-game slate and ended up getting to 40% Jaguars, 40% Chiefs, 20% Titans, essentially.
All right, that is going to do it for us. If you guys didn't do it yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, enjoy the football games, and I'm going to be back for the NBA show later on the night. So if you guys are playing NBA DFS, check out Live Before Lock. I'll be on here with Matt LaMarca. Have a great rest of your weekend.